All right, we're studying Christian evidences for those of you who are visiting with us, and you'll hear me refer to the big three. And the big three in Christian evidences has to do with the existence of God, the inspiration of the Bible, and the deity of Christ. A general line of reasoning that I use is if God exists and is infinite, and he does exist and he is infinite. What do I mean by infinite? We talked about it last week. Screen's messed up. Okay, well, it looks good here. That usually disappears. What I need to do?
I don't know.
Escape?
No.
Nope, that's not it.
Control the remote.
Well, usually this disappears. What I need to do, Scott?
We turn it off and turn it back on.
Maybe, is there an exit screen?
Normally that on the bottom leaves. What'd you do?
Hit exit.
Where's that? Oh, right here. Okay. Yay, thank you. All right. Why does it normally leave on its own? I wonder. Okay. So at any rate, the general line of reasoning is if God exists and is infinite in his attributes, that is, he is all loving, all just, etc. So if God exists and is infinite, and the Bible is the Word of God, and the Bible teaches X, where whatever X stands for, then we can know X. And so what we've been doing these last few weeks is talking about the existence of God. Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is talk about the inspiration of the Bible, because you have to show the inspiration of the Bible to show, I think, that Jesus is the Son of God. So I think it's important that it's seen in that order. I think you could show from history that Jesus really lived and died, but to show that he is a divine being, I think rests on the testimony of Scripture. So that's the reason it's very important, to proceed in this order. And so what we're doing now is we've been talking about some arguments for God, and we've talked about the cosmological argument that has to do with the general characteristics of the world. And now we're talking about what's called the teleological argument, or more popularly known as the argument to design. And the reasoning there is if there's order and arrangement in the world, then there's design. And there is order and arrangement, therefore there is design. But you can't have design without what? A designer. Design makes no sense unless there's some kind of intelligence. And we call that designer God. So that's what we're talking about. And we've already set out that kind of evidence, and now what we're doing is looking at a couple of objections. There are two main objections I want us to look at. One has to do with what is called the so-called problem of evil. And the idea there is that if God is omnipotent, what does that mean? He's all-powerful. And if God is omnibenevolent, which means what? He's all good, all loving, then two things. If he's omnipotent, then he could do something about evil in the world. And if he is omnibenevolent, then what? Sounds like could, but what? He would do something, about evil in the world. But there's evil in the world, therefore what? He's either not one or the other, right? Okay, so that's kind of where we are. And then the other argument we're going to look at has to do with evolution, and we'll start on that next week. We'll do a crash course in atheistic and theistic evolution. Everybody kind of know where we are now, where we're going? Any questions? Emily, did you take me for a class where I talked about some of this? So see, you can just sleep, can't you? Yeah, I remember you barely got by. No, just kidding. Oh, not Emily. Okay. All right, so we're looking at the problem of evil. And I just said this, and I said that, and I said that. Okay. All right, now, got 3 points I want to make today. 3 points. By the way, I failed to mention this. I meant to. Did you remember a few weeks ago I had Larry? I think you might have been, the elder in charge that month. Mattie Bird Hobson, our 103-year-old friend. Anybody remember that? I had her mentioned in prayer. Well, to our surprise, she died. Was it Tuesday night? I think it was Tuesday night. And so we had to do a whirlwind trip Friday morning down in Mississippi. 5 hours or so. We started about 4:30 Friday morning and left at 6:30 and all that. Visitation started at 11 to 2. We got there about 12:30, and then I did the funeral at 2 o'clock. And so if you can, in your prayers, remember, I'll just give you this much, the Hobson family, Hobson. You remember me saying in a sermon one time about a lady that I could show up at her house, late at night and just go get in a bed in one of the bedrooms? None of you remember that? Well, you're supposed to remember my sermons. Okay, 2 people have. Well, that would have been Mattie Bird. She is a dear friend. And we knew her over half a century. And now she's gone to her reward. And it was a sad day, but it was also a happy day because she's really done quite well just last couple of weeks. She was at church Sunday before last. And she loved to iron, and we'd go see her, and we'd take some shirts for her to iron. She'd always say, David, bring your shirts. Linda, don't forget the shirts. And then I'd fuss at Linda. I'd say, don't take her shirts. And anyway, she's just a great person. I've been friends with that family for a long, long time. All right. Now, 3 points. Let's get back. That just popped in my head, and if I don't say it, I'll forget it. So remember the Hobson family. The first point that we want to make here is that this world is the best of all possible worlds for the purposes that God had in creation. It's very important you understand that last part. For the purposes that God had in creation. The second point is sin is the only intrinsic evil. What I mean by intrinsic? Remember we talked about that?
Inside.
All right, in and of itself. There's intrinsic importance, and then there is instrumental importance. This deal here is instrumentally important. Why? If it breaks, throw it away, get another one, right? It's not intrinsically important. This pen is instrumentally important. It's an instrument to be used. What would be an example of something that's intrinsically important? God is intrinsically important. Jesus, love, that's intrinsically important, and so forth. So sin is the only intrinsic evil that is evil in and of itself. Now that's very important. That's the only evil. Now as soon as I say that, a lot of people will say, yeah, but what about somebody who's suffering? That's not intrinsically evil. Well, what about a pain that somebody has? That's not intrinsically evil. As we will see, pain can be a good thing. We don't like pain, but it's actually something given to us by God. I read a book one time called The Gift of Pain. How can pain be a good thing? Okay, Barbara, it tells us that something's wrong, right? You have appendicitis, you have some pain. Well, what if you didn't have pain? Well, you just kill over and die. What if you're running in a race or whatever, but your body does not, signify that it needs to stop or whatever, then you just run yourself to death. And so, Steve,
You look at a leper at the situation when they lose the sense.
Yeah.
what happens to their body.
Okay, Steve talks about those who lose the sense of pain, then in turn what happens to their body. So the big thing here we're going to go into is sin is the only intrinsically wrong thing. Okay? It's very important. Okay, and then the last point is that all of the things that occur that so many people take exception to are for the purpose that God had in making this world the best of all possible worlds for His purposes. That's important. For His purposes. Okay? We got a plan? Okay, some of you kind of remind me of those guys in Acts 1. Well, I gaze ye into the heavens. Doug?
Is it accurate to say that God created the world as a proving ground?
Yes, it is. That's similar to what I said about we're on probation. See, actually, we do all kinds of things in life that God's given us things to enjoy. And, you know, things to help us develop morally, you know, and spiritually. And, but there's only one big decision that all of us have to make. It's not going to be what kind of job we have. It's not going to be where we live. Not going to be what kind of car we drive, how much money we got in the bank. None of that's going to be, those things are significant in our lives, but they're not the big thing. There's only one big thing. And that is deciding whether you want to be a child of God or not. That's really the only, at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters in this world. That's pretty profound, isn't it? So you need to sort of keep that in mind because this world is to help us make that decision. All right, let's look at the first point. This world, it's on the screen, is the best of all possible worlds for God's purposes in creation. What was God's purpose? What was His purpose in creation? His purpose was to create a being that would enter into fellowship with Him. I think I maybe mentioned this last week. In the Godhead, you already had the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, correct? So you had this community. You had this community of love. You had communion with those three beings. There was fellowship with those three beings. Love begets love. So God created human beings to enter into a relationship with Him. He wanted to share what already prevailed in that Godhead. See, God did not create us because He lacked anything. See, we don't want to say that. What would be wrong with saying that? Doug, got an idea? Why is it not correct to say that God created us because He lacked something? Think about it. Larry?
You'd be taking away one of the attributes of God. He would not be omnipotent.
All right. He would lose some of His infinitude. He would not be infinite in all of His attributes. So God didn't create us because he needed something, because He lacked something and said, wow, I got to create somebody, because I'm lacking in this area. See, then God ceases to be, the God that we that we love and adore. So love begets love. So He creates these beings to enter into fellowship with Him. So He wanted beings, it's very important. He wanted beings to enter into a relationship with Him. Beings who would love Him. Beings who would obey Him. Beings who would want to worship Him. Beings who would adore Him. Okay, to have that kind of being, you got to have something else. You want to take a stab at it? Emily?
I was just thinking about what you said, and I was like, in a sense, it almost sounds like God created people just for Himself, almost like narcissistic, if you put it that way. But that's not what He did, right? Like He created us just for Him,
Yeah.
And, I mean, I could see where somebody would say, well,
So what would you say to that?
Well, that's why I'm asking you.
Well, that was not in my notes. And my notes are in my head, okay?
Sorry.
For the most part.
He calls us his children, and I would liken it to the same thing as having children.
Yeah.
You can never have children and lack not a single thing and have a good, productive, wonderful life.
Exactly.
But bringing children into the equation adds something, even though it's not something that is needed, it does add something beautiful.
Right. Now, obviously, there are children, that's a good analogy. There are children who are brought into the world for less than ideal reasons. But ideally, you know, for children to be brought into the world is because of a loving relationship between a husband and a wife, and they want to share. They want to share what prevails in that union, you know, with others.
David,
Yeah, Linda.
it's not that God created us so that we would adore him. It's that he wanted to share his love, and love should be reciprocated.
Right.
Because the way you were phrasing it, he wanted someone who would adore him.
Yeah.
He wanted someone who would obey him.
Right.
So the phrasing is what makes it sound
Oh, I see.
narcissistic.
Okay.
So it's more, they wanted to share, the Godhead wanted
Right.
to share that.
Okay.
Love begets love, and the only way he would get love in return if we had the right to choose not to.
Right. Okay. Did everybody hear that? Emily, does that satisfy you?
That was exactly what I was gonna say.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. No, you didn't interrupt. Yes, sir, Doug.
I think also something that we can think about is, lack of a better term, God likes to brag on people that are obeying him, like he did Job. You know, look at my servant.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he I don't know if desires or wants is the right word, but I mean, he appreciates that, obviously.
Yeah. That's a good example, too. Look at my servant Job. You know, if you think that he serves me just because I've built a hedge around him, you don't know as much as you think you do, Satan. And so that's a good example. Larry?
You know, I think of when God says, let us make man in our image. I mean, to me, that encompasses all that, you know, it's like, that answers the why to me. You know, why is created? Why am I here? You know, if I'm created in God's image, then I need to understand what that means.
And that has to be understood as a spiritual, in a spiritual way, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Okay, so let's move on here just a little bit. Now, I like this expression right here. I read a book one time by another fellow his name is John Hick, and the title of the book was Evil and the God of Love, and he speaks of the world as a veil of soul making, a veil of soul making. And actually, I love literature, and I found that John Hick, getting that confused with another John Hicks, in a good book I read one time on suffering, yet will I trust him. But at any rate, in researching this, John Keats, you're familiar with Keats in literature. John Keats is the one that first originated the phrase veil of soul making, as far as I'm able to determine. Now just think about it. What is a veil? Veil of soul making.
Valley.
What?
Valley.
John says valley. What else? Anything else? That sort of sums it up, doesn't it? Of what? Soul making. So speaking of the world as a veil of soul making, what was Keats saying?
Proving ground.
Proving ground, okay. A place where we can do what? Make the most important decision of our lives, right? And so we might expect that this world is going to have some things in it that will help us make the right decision. You kind of see where this is going? So you got to think a little bit here. It's not like we're just reading Acts 2:38, okay? I mean, there's a place for that. We want to do that, and we will do that. but not right now. Okay? Got a comment on it? So to have this veil of soul making, we've got to have some things. Y'all kind of see where I'm going? I'm trying to ease up on you here. First of all, we got to have a being who's a free moral agent. It's got to be a free moral agent. We have to have a being who can decide, I think Linda said it, who could decide to not enter into a relationship with God. Right? That makes sense? To use your analogy, Miss, on parents and children, what if our children were just robots? You know, where they had to obey us. You know, they had to love us. You know, every morning they had to run to, you know, a parent and give them a hug. You know, they were forced to do it. See, that's not love. That's not genuine love, is it? See, genuine love has got to be love that's expressed freely. Make sense? Yes. Okay. All right. So another thing I might mention at this point is this. For God to have that kind of being, all right, y'all with me now? You hanging with me? For God to have that kind of human being, then He had to have us at a kind of a distance. Let's call it a distance of knowledge. What if God was so overwhelmingly present with us that we could not refuse to believe in Him? You see, people, Doug, can refuse to believe in God today, right? But what if He was just so overwhelmingly present, Elon? You know, I mean, He's like right here. And in one way He is, but you know what I mean, in a different sense.
We'll take away our free will.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting to. See, it'd be like, well, you can't refuse to believe in God because He's like just all over you, right? You know, He's out there picking cucumbers with you or something. See, you know, you can't deny it. And so He's got to be at some kind of distance of knowledge. However, the distance has got to be a distance such that He could be known. He could be known if you wanted to know about Him. But if you didn't want to know about Him, then He would be at a distance where you could deny Him. All right, what about it?
Just a few
Elon.
minutes ago, we mentioned Job.
Mm-hmm.
Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him, about all that he hath on every side?
Mm-hmm.
Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. Job had a feeling that God was with him all the time. That's close to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. He could be known, and Job knew Him. Correct? Okay, thank you, Elon. All right, now, to have this being who is, to have this veil of soul making, then that's also going to suggest that we've got to be in a world that is rather, I'm trying to think of the right words here, rather law-abiding. It's teleological. Remember what I said there? They're purposes. It has some aim to it. Why would I say that our world needs to be law-abiding?
Points us to God.
Okay, it points us to God. But just think about, what if the world, take gravity for example. What if gravity was inconsistent? Just think about that. You know, here's someone, I think I'm getting ahead of myself here, but think about, well, animals. We don't want animals to suffer. And so if there's a dog gets, blind or whatever, and it's running and it's about to hit a tree, then God could have made the tree just to turn into mush, where, it would not hit the tree. Or no, here's a better illustration. What about an axe? Okay, we got this axe and it's good for cutting firewood, right? But what if you was going to use the axe for some other purpose that you needed to use it for, and it just changed its whole nature? See, it's not law-abiding. We couldn't count on anything. You know, it'd just be living in absurdity. And so we got to have a world that plays by the rules. Okay? So that means that some things are going to happen. Namely what? Accidents. Do you know the name Marvin Rainey? Well, Marvin Rainey used to preach at a congregation I preached at. He's now passed on to his reward. But I was told, he lived in the same house that I eventually lived in, that this was a horrible thing. He was, how many of you have ever run over a tricycle when you're backing out your driveway? How many tricycles have been destroyed? Or bicycles? Nobody? Jerry has. Jerry, you're the only, let's make a note of this on, what is today's date?
December the 1st.
December the 1st. That on December the 1st, that Jerry is the only human being in this class who's ever run over an object accidentally in his driveway. And let's also make a note that I don't believe that, okay? Jerry, what have you run over?
Oh, well, have you seen my pew? So, what else? Baseball bats,
Yeah.
my scooters, bicycles,
Brother Rainey accidentally ran over his child.
cats.
Now someone might argue, well now why couldn't God have stepped in there, you know, and interfered with gravity? Could he have done that? Could God have done that? If he's omnipotent, he could, but
He can't go against his nature.
but
Can't go against nature, the world.
yeah, but why couldn't he? He could, Larry. He could step in,
That wasn't his design. That he wasn't-
but that'd change the whole nature of the world. Okay, you can count on gravity if you're trying to push a vehicle down a slope, or do like I've done countless times. You know, got it in second gear and get on the side of a hill and going down to try to get it started. I can count on gravity here, but if there's a child in the way, all of a sudden gravity disappears. See, that's chaos. All right, Larry.
Well, that's my point, where we were going. It's like, at the alternative school, sometimes a kid would do something and I'd say, okay, well, here's the punishment. And immediately was, well, can't you just make an exception this one time? Now, if I make an exception that one time, what's the result? I no longer have a rule. I no longer have stability.
Okay. All right.
David, question?
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. Yes, sir.
Providence of God. God does enter into our lives. How do we reconcile that with the idea that he won't always step in the way?
He's not going to change his environment. I mean, listen, you won't talk to anybody that believes in providence more than I do, but he's not going to change this world.
But even in providence, he doesn't make you. It's more like the options or decisions are there for you, but you still have to accept it.
Yeah, I don't think
accept it, take that chance.
Okay, that's a good comment, Linda. God is not functioning like a, what do you call the guys with puppets?
Puppeteer.
Yeah, puppeteer. God's not functioning as a puppeteer, you know, making this happen or making that happen. And I love the concept of providence. I've preached on it here, but I still remain confused, you know, some, Elon, because I believe, how many times have we heard, I heard a sister say this one time right in front of a church building where I was. She was talking about a wreck and a child was spared, and she said that child's angel, you know, was there. And I couldn't help but wonder, what about those children who are not spared? Where were their angels? Were they off duty? You know how we are. If a tornado goes through a community and takes out the liquor store, we'll say, yeah, we told you God hates that liquor. But if the same tornado takes out a nursery, we don't want to talk about that.
I was gonna say,
I don't, and by the way, excuse me, I'm not talking about bushes. You know, I'm talking about a children's nursery. All right, yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna say, I'm not, this is off the fly, off the cuff, so I'm not saying it's accurate, but I was thinking, like, it might be that he would, on very rare occasions, within his own omnipotence, to decide to make exceptions to the rules. But again, I'm gonna relate it back to being a parent. He would do it in very specific circumstances when it suits the purpose he needs it to, as an omnipotent being that understands things better than we do.
Okay.
He will not make a general rule of making exceptions, because as Larry states, if you commonly do that, you cannot have anything but chaos. And so he's an omnipotent being that can make an exception that we do not understand.
Okay.
He can't make it a general exception, a
All
general
right.
rule to go outside of the rules he's set for us.
Yeah. I think I'm in agreement with that. Larry?
Well, the one case where you would see that is miracles. Now, if God granted you a miracle, what's the next thing you'd want? Another miracle. It's like, when do miracles cease and whatever? It's like, there was a time when God had miracles and their purpose was, they weren't exceptions to the rule. It was to let you know that God really is. You might not, but in other words, a miracle basically takes the natural to confirm the supernatural.
Okay. That's another area. I heard this sister say too, that she was involved in a car wreck and it turned over 3 times, and she knew that was a miracle because she was spared. I don't see that as a miracle myself. Larry?
Well, the guy that landed the plane on the Hudson, and everybody wants to say that was a miracle.
Yeah.
No, it's not, because it can be explained. LA can probably explain to you how that plane, landed on the water and the physics involved.
The plane's doing what it's supposed to do, with the air, and the pilot who's, guiding the plane's doing what he does, and the water does what it does. So it's like people, say when your blood coagulates, that's a miracle. I don't see that as a miracle. I see that our blood's doing what God designed it to do. Or a baby's birth is a miracle. We use the word so loosely, I think, sometimes. Here's one thing that I'll throw out to you, and it's way off subject. Maybe it's not off the subject since you all brought it up, but it's off where I'm trying to go this morning. How many times have we prayed at bedsides, God be with the doctor, that he doesn't shake when he uses his scalpel, okay? God be with the nurses, that they hook the IVs up, properly, and that they don't kink the line, when it's being installed, as a nurse did to me one time. And God be with, we use that kind of language. Well, what happened to the language, according to Mark, that with God all things are possible? And so what is wrong with saying, God, according to your word, all things are possible? And we call upon you, at this time to intervene with this person who is suffering. What's wrong with that? Do you see the difference, though? See, on the one hand, we're praying for humans to be instrumentally efficient. All right, Barbara?
All things are possible through God, but it doesn't mean he's going to do it.
Okay, that's
I'm
true.
saying? It's possible. He can do anything, but it's not dependent on what it is you're asking him to do.
Okay.
People make mistakes. You can't, and he knows that.
Right. Steve?
Providence is the non-miraculous
Yeah.
workings of God.
I agree.
And you can ask Emily, some medicines work on some people and won't work on others for the same diseases.
Yeah.
Now, if it works, God could have made it work, but that's not a miracle. It was his providence to help the body do that.
Okay. Good comments. Doug?
I was just gonna say, and it's not a counter argument or anything, But, you know, the prayers of a righteous man availeth much.
Right.
So they have some effect to maybe change what would have happened to something else. You know, so that's obviously, it's not a miracle or whatever. God could use his providence to
Yeah.
change an outcome.
Yeah, if I didn't believe in providence, I would give up. And you know, that's a study we ought to do sometimes. Brother, you know the name Brother Cecil May? Brother Cecil May has a fine little book on providence. It's like, I want to say it's maybe 13 lessons or something. Some of you seen the book before? Tommy has. It's a good read. But if I didn't believe in providence, I'd give up on prayer. I mean, otherwise, I mean in my prayers, you know, God, I need this. You know, I'm praying for this family, you know, with their significant loss. And I pray that they can have comfort and so forth. I mean, I believe that. And I think that we should. Okay, we've got just a few minutes. Let's plow on here before I'm about to run out of gas here on this vocal cord. Okay. Now, another thing, and it's not on here, so I want y'all that. You see these these points right here? Man must be allowed to be a free moral agent. The world's got to be law-abiding. And the environment's got to be challenging to us, that will allow us to obey God or can allow us to reject God, if you will. All right, here's another point I want you to add, because it's not on my slide, and I guess it didn't fit, and I forgot to make it fit. This world must supply man's basic physical needs. That'd go right under that last blue dot. This world must supply man's basic physical needs. Now, why is that important to argue that this is the best world?
Because that would take up all his time. If he had to do it himself, I mean.
Okay. All right, let me leave this thought with you. I was thinking we have these physical bodies, correct? So do we have certain physical needs? Like what? Like turkey. So what does that mean?
Air, water,
There's some turkey that's going to bite the dust. Is that right? So what does that open the door to? That opens the door to pain, because the turkey disliked that. Okay? All right.
I like turkey, but we can live without turkey. We can't live without oxygen or water or
Yeah.
gravity or
Yeah,
those things.
yeah, that's what Linda mentioned. Air, water. We got to have this. We got to have what we got to have for us to survive, which includes those elements plus food. Okay, thank you very much.